A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. We will start the day with the secret of success. This is basically the answer you find from our own house or our own room. The roof says, when we see the roof, it says it teaches us to aim high. And when we see the fan, it teaches us to remain cool. When we see the clock, it says that every minute is precious. When we see the mirror, it asks us to reflect before we act. When we see the window, it asks us to see the world. And when we see the calendar, it asks us to keep ourselves up to date. And when we see the door, it asks us that if you push hard, you can achieve your goal. So these are the inspirations that we can draw from our own home. So the application part of this, of course, is that many times in ethics you will get a direct question like it has also been asked in the previous years: what is anger? What is happiness? What according to you is happiness? How do you achieve it? So like that, you can have a question like, what is success? How do you achieve it? So these are the secrets to success which you can see, or you can learn from our own locally available things from our own natural surroundings. So you can also have an essay on motivation or inspiration and all that. So in this case, you can also write how you can take motivation from the things which are always around but we hardly take notice of. So these will be the applications of this secret of success. Now we will start with the topics of the day. So we will start with the first topic of the day about solar energy. So yesterday itself, I had briefed you about solar energy, where 750 megawatt photovoltaic project has been inaugurated by the Prime Minister in Rewa. So, and also I told you about sure, pure and secure. That was a statement given by the Prime Minister regarding solar energy. And this comes under your GS3, which is under the topic of energy. So now let's see what was there in today's editorial. So first is regarding the installed capacity and what is the potential that India has. So India's installed base of the solar power is 35 gigawatts, and it is projected that by 2024 this will be 50 gigawatts of solar power. But however, if you look at our Paris goal, that is according to the Paris Agreement 2015, we had promised that we will reach a solar potential of 100 gigawatts. So solar installed capacity of 100 gigawatts. So what we see from this is that we are falling short of, there is a deficit of nearly 50% in as far as our capacity or our installed capacity of solar power. So this is one issue that we are lagging behind our the Paris goal agreement. And also the domestic cell manufacturing capacity is also very low. So the domestic cell manufacturing capacity is 3.1 gigawatts, which was in 2019. So that is very less. Our domestic production is less, and we are reliant on imports from China. So our dependency on imports from very high. So next we will discuss a few issues. The first is the dependence on China. As I just told, that we are dependent on China for imports of the solar panels. And our domestic manufacturing capacity, as we just saw, was 3.1 gigawatt last year, which is very low. So in this regard, the Chinese case study can be quoted, which can be quoted as a successful example. So if you see China's manufacturing capacity in the 1990s, so from there, that time in the 1990s, the China's manufacturing capacity was almost insignificant. And now if you see, the Chinese solar panels are, they have a dominance, and many countries across the world are importing the Chinese panels. So this was possible because of the policy support that the government has given, and also technology. So they acquired the top technologies which are required for improving the solar energy manufacturing. So that technology was given priority. Next is China also started importing the raw materials which are critical in the manufacture of the solar panels, like polysilicon. So it started to import these raw materials, and it also started to invest in the other countries, particularly in the tropical region. So it started investing in these third countries so that there it can develop a ready capability. So these systematic steps that China took over a period of now 3 decades has made it possible for China to, starting from an insignificant manufacturing capability, now it has a very dominant position today across the world. So this was possible because of these initiatives that were taken by China. So this can be quoted as a case study, and you can tell that this way we can also have dominance in solar panels, and we can stop our reliance on other importing solar panels. So, in this regard, what should be the way forward? First is our leadership of the International Solar Alliance. So, International Solar Alliance was India's initiative, and nearly 120 nations are a part of it, particularly the sunshine countries in the tropical region, that is between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. So, India's leadership should be so good that we can advance manufacturing and the absorption of these solar photovoltaic cells in all the low and the middle income countries in the region. So this is the leadership role that India can play, that in all these low and middle income countries, India can help in the manufacture and absorption of these solar photovoltaic cells. The second is to provide facilities. In order to the private for the private sector to come and start investing in this field, government will also have to set up facilities and provide a conducive environment for the private sector to be able to start functioning in this. Next is the financing. So low cost financing is very important, which needs to be provided to the solar manufacturers who are engaged in this field. So low cost financing is very important. Next is the intellectual property. So we have to encourage these manufacturers to also invest in intellectual property, but not just in the deployment. So the promotion of this intellectual property itself is very important. Next is we also need to invest in newer technologies. These newer technologies, if you see nowadays that there are aesthetic photovoltaic windows. So from the windows itself, the solar energy can be captured and it is converted into the energy is captured, and then we have roof tiles on the buildings, which all do the same purpose which the solar panels do. So these solar panels can be installed on the windows and the roof tiles. So these newer technologies also we need to invest in, and we also need to make it large scale, and absorption of these new technologies possible. And we also have to increase the deployment of the solar panels. So we came up with plans for canal top or rooftop solar panels. So we need to increase the deployment of more panels on residential as well as on commercial buildings. So this is one more thing we should do. And the last thing is the Make in India. So as we just discussed that our dependence on China for importing solar panels is very high, we need to encourage domestic manufacturing. So that for that we have to further encourage the manufacturing of solar panels under the Make in India initiative. So these are the steps that India can take in order to be more self-reliant in the solar energy sector. The next topic is the Europe-China relations. So this is a part of your GS2 syllabus, which has a topic like what the policies of the countries and how they are affecting or influencing India. So this editorial was written by Vijay Gokhale, who is a former ambassador to China. So it talks about how the relations between Europe and China have come closer, and there are also issues between the relations. And in this backdrop of the Europe and China relations, what India can do with respect to Europe and how it can develop its relations with Europe. So first we will have a look at the Europe-China relations. So there has been mutual support that Europe and China have been providing to each other. So it was the European Union which actually supported the China's case for entering into the WTO. And China has also always supported the European project. So therefore there is a mutual support for each other, and jointly China as well as Europe, they contribute to nearly 35% of the global GDP in the PPP terms. So economically they know that they one exports, the other imports, so there is that dependence and interconnectedness between the two, and they have been supporting of each other with respect to WTO and European projects. So the mutual support is there. Next is the economic supply chains. So the editorial says that between 1995 and 2012, so Germany was a country that became an economic superpower in this duration. So it became an economic powerhouse where it has enhanced its industrial value by nearly 37%. And for Germany to be able to grow economically so strong in this duration of time, in this period of time, it relied mostly on the supply chains from China rather than the supply chains in the United States. So the economic supply chains got integrated that time, and the economic development of countries in the Europe happened because of the supply chains in China. But however, there are several issues in the relation between China and Europe. The first is the influence. So, China has been now talking to several Eastern and the Central European countries and convincing them for a 16 plus 1 format of talks. So now Europe is thinking that even among Europe, China is now trying to establish more contact and more talks with the Central and the Eastern European countries. And also the PLA Navy, the People's Liberation Army Navy of China, is also carrying out joint exercises along with Russia in the Baltic Sea. So that is another cause of concern for the European countries. This is another positive. And then the economically also we have seen that China has been acquiring several companies, particularly those companies which are engaged in bringing up new technologies. So China has acquired some key technological companies such as KUKA in Germany. And when it comes to strategic, China has again trying to acquire key ports, for example, Piraeus in Greece. So these initiatives by China, it shows that it has led to some raising of red flags in European countries. So the Chinese aggression can already be seen in the South China Sea dispute, now with India in the Galvan Valley, and then with Hong Kong also it is seen. So all of these have seen that eyeballs have been raised in Europe, and so Europe has kind of become skeptical about the Chinese intentions in the. So in this backdrop, Europe says that there are basically three determinants which determine the nature of relationship between Europe and China. So one is that China is a negotiating partner. Second is that China is an economic competitor. And the third is that China is a systemic rival. So among these three, the last factor, the China being a systemic rival, is gradually becoming a dominant political narrative in the European countries. So these are the three main determinants of the relation between China and. So now in this backdrop of the changing relations between Europe and China, what is the role that India can carve out for itself? First is the Indo-Pacific. So European countries also have their presence in the region, and everybody wants a free and open, inclusive Indo-Pacific. So in this regard, India can play a role by helping provide that peace and prosperity which is needed in the Indo-Pacific. So in having and ensuring peace and prosperity in India in the Indo-Pacific region, Europe and China can collaborate with each other. Next is the technological cooperation. So various emerging technologies are there, like artificial intelligence, 5G technologies, in which China is now making very quick progress. So Europe and India can come together on this and start cooperation in the emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and 5G technology. Next is the trade and investment agreement. So we already have this trade and investment agreement. If that negotiations have already been started, but these needs to be put on track because there were several issues in this trade and investment agreement which could not be signed. So we wanted more access in European countries for our services, that is export of services should be more liberal for India. And on the other hand, European countries were dumping a lot of products in India, especially the dairy products and even the automobiles, which was hurting the domestic industry in India. So mutually we have had these issues, because of which the trade and investment agreement could not be signed. So this can be brought back on track, and we can start renegotiating all this, and we can conclude. So this is about what is a new role that India can carve out in the changing nature of the Europe-China relations. Now we move on to the next topic, which is smart cities. So smart cities we have already seen in the previous videos what is the definition of smart cities, then what is the objective of smart cities, then what are the various issues and challenges that the smart cities are facing, and the way forward. So the entire discussion we have already seen it as part of discussing the editorial, and also we have taken a full-fledged question on smart cities which we have discussed in detail. What we are going to see in this editorial is a little bit of a revision and some more data on the smart cities program. So smart cities program is a flagship program. For 100 cities were selected which were to be developed as smart cities, and now 5 years, for June 2020, 5 years have been completed since the launch of the smart cities mission. So it is a good time to take stock of the developments that have happened under the mission and see what has been the progress. And it is basically an area based development model where in the city some particular areas are going to be selected, and there we are going to go for either retrofitting or redevelopment or whatever that area based development approach is used. So this is retrofitting, redevelopment, or pan city development. These are the various approaches that are adopted under the smart cities mission. So now we will look at some of the issues. So first we'll talk about the delays. So many of the projects which were started under the smart cities mission have seen a lot of delays. So in the period of these 5 years, so 5,151 projects have been started, were actually sanctioned, out of which only just 1630 projects have been completed, and the rest of the project and other projects have just been in the tendering phase itself. That is, they have been only just tendered. 4700 projects have been tendered, while only 1630 projects have been completed in a span of 5 years, when actually the number of projects were 5151. So this shows that a very small portion of the projects that were started have actually seen the light of the day at the end of 5 years. So this is one. The second is the underutilization of fund. The total investment that was made under the smart cities project was more than 2 lakh crore. But out of this, the amount that has been actually utilized for the completion of these projects was just 26,700 crore. So this shows that the funds have not been completely utilized to fasten the implementation of these tendered projects. So all of these points to the delay that is persisting in this scheme. Next issue is the public health has been completely neglected. So when you look at the smart cities mission, particularly we are talking about this because we have the COVID-19 pandemic that is going on. So the amount of funds that have been invested in the public health as part of the smart cities mission is very less. So it is said that public health has been a major blind spot in as far as the smart cities mission is concerned. So in more than 5,000 projects that we spoke about, only 69 projects are related to the development of health infrastructure. So this is a very small portion of the project out of the total 5,000, that only 69 projects are related to health infrastructure. And if you talk about this in terms of the amount that has been allocated, just around 1% of the total mission cost has been allocated to development of the health infrastructure. So this shows that when we are in this amidst the pandemic situation, and when we know that public health is going to be very important, smart cities mission has allocated just a meager 1% of its total mission cost to development of health infrastructure in the cities. The next issue is the parallel governance structures. So if you look at the 12th schedule of the Constitution that was introduced by the 17th Constitutional Amendment Act, which gave a constitutional status to the urban local bodies, the 12th schedule has some 18 functions. So these are the functions that have been entrusted to the urban local bodies, and they are supposed to carry out these functions. So, but however, under the Smart Cities Mission, special purpose vehicle has been created, which will look at the various the overall implementation of the Smart Cities Mission, which will involve many of the subjects which are under these 18 functions allocated to the ULBs. So it is basically creating parallel governance structures, multiple structures which are responsible for the same set of goals, like it could be health or education or sanitation, which are spread across these various institutional structures. So it is kind of creating an institutional jungle, which is not only going to create confusion among the minds of the citizens, but it is also going to diffuse the accountability on part of these structures. So there can be a blame game between the urban local bodies and the special purpose vehicle tomorrow if something goes wrong. So this diffusion of accountability and responsibility on part of these structures and the confusion because of the presence of multiple institutions is an issue. Next is the lack of decentralization. So, this principle of subsidiarity, which we had seen in the second ARC, is not followed because there is lack of decentralization. When we have these institutions of local governance, which are actually the models of decentralization, that is the Panchayati Raj and the urban local bodies, but they have not been allotted functions under the Smart Cities program. So, they have not been allowed to implement the Smart Cities program in spite of the presence of elected urban local bodies. So, this principle of subsidiarity is now being breached or violated, and there is again a kind of centralization in the formation of special purpose vehicle. So, we are going against this principle of decentralization. Next is a weakening of local bodies, because these local bodies already have very weak institutional capacity, they have less of human capacity. So, what should have rather been done is to improve the institutional and the human capacities of these urban local bodies so that they are able to implement the schemes like a smart city mission. But these have been neglected and a new body is being created. So, these local bodies, it will lead to further weakening because now they have not been made responsible for implementation of this mission, and they are going to see that the subjects that have been allocated to them under the 12th schedule, that also is now being diluted by creating a separate body. So now, and yes, smart cities will come under GS1, which talks about urbanization and the issues and challenges facing the urbanization. So you can put that under your GS1 syllabus. So the next topic we'll be discussing is in Iran-China relations and its impact on India. So in the recent news, what is there is that Iran and China have signed this economic and security partnership. So this has amidst the pandemic that is now going on. So the two countries have signed this economic and security partnership. So under this, China will be making a lot of investments in Iran, in its energy infrastructure, in the banking infrastructure, telecommunications, ports, railways. So like that, in innumerable number of projects, China is going to be making its investment in Iran. And as far as Iran is concerned, after the United States sanctions, which even cut off the access to the international banking system for Iran, so many businesses in Iran was dying out. The economic activities was getting suffocated in Iran. So this sanctions by the United States has only made Iran now to go into the arms of China. So now China is taking advantage out of the situation and is trying to develop close relations with Iran by offering to make a lot of investments in Iran. Also, the benefit for China is that China is making so much of investments. It is going to increase its economic and strategic presence in the region. Also, as I said, these investments are going to be in ports and other things. So these ports are also coming up in the choke point, that is the Strait of Hormuz. So which is a choke point. So therefore, that will again increase Chinese strategic presence in the region. So which should be a cause of concern for India also, because India was itself about to develop this Gwadar port with Iran. Now with the Chinese investments, which is coming in very huge amount, and also the development of or the Chinese investments in the Strait of Hormuz also, this should be a cause of concern for India. And it is precisely because the United States felt that the Iran was not adhering to the P5+1 deal, and it was violating that, and United States put sanctions and it annulled that deal, that Iran was forced to go into China's arms and welcome the Chinese investments. So in return for the Chinese investments, China is going to get oil imports from Iran, and China is dependent for 75% of its oil requirements. China is dependent on imports, and for making so much of investments, China is going to get these oil supply from Iran at a highly discounted rates. So this will be very beneficial. It's a win-win for China because these investments are also strategic in nature, which is going to increase Chinese presence in the region, and in return China is also going to get heavily discounted oil, which is again good for China. Apart from this, the two countries have also agreed for military and strategic cooperation. There is going to be joint training and joint exercises, even joint research and weapons development is also going to be there. So, with all this, the impact on India is that India has always had good relations with Iran. But because of the United States pressure on India, India had also reduced the import of oil from Iran. So it was in these times that China developed its close relations with Iran. So this is again part of China's strategy to develop close relations with those countries with which India has had a friendly relations. So now India is losing out on cooperation with Iran because of the increasing Chinese presence and investments there. And India's investments in Gwadar is also now going to lose its importance because of the maybe the presence of Chinese in the Strait of Hormuz. So this is going to be an important implication for India from a strategic point of view. Now we go to the next topic, which is the India-China, or you can also use this under the topic of the Indian Ocean region or the Indo-Pacific. So the recent news here was that now India is very welcoming of India has now opened to Australia's participation in the naval exercise called as Malabar. So till now India, or even for that matter Australia, was not very keen to be part of the Malabar exercises, so which is a naval exercise between four countries. So now India has been very open to Australia's participation in this naval exercise. So when we talk of the origin of the Malabar exercises, it started in 2007, where the navies of Japan, Australia, United States started in the Indian Ocean region. So the reason why this was started was also because if India was to conduct separate bilateral exercises with each of these countries, that would not make much of sense because that would also increase the costs. So when we are conducting naval exercises together, then it will also lead to optimization of the cost. So because of this reason, rather than conducting separate bilateral exercises, India thought it could conduct it together. But however, China was very much against this whole concept right from the very beginning. And China describes this Malabar exercises as an first step towards the Asian NATO. So where these countries are trying to come together, and that had a strategic implication. This has been the China's stance right from the beginning. So, but now why India's move today, that India is more open to the involvement of Australia in the participation of in the Malabar exercises, that is more important today because of the China's growing power in the Indian Ocean region. So in the Indian Ocean region, Chinese presence has been increasing. Its naval presence has been increasing in the Indian Ocean. It has military bases in several countries in the Indian Ocean. For instance, in Djibouti, in the Horn of Africa, it has a military base. Then it has Karachi and Gwadar ports, which the China is developing. They are also de facto naval facilities for the Chinese Navy. So like this, it is developing various military bases, and then it is also occupying, or rather increasing its presence in several choke points. So now we just saw in the previous topic of India and China and Iran, that China is now going to invest in development of ports and other infrastructure, even in the Strait of Hormuz, which is a choke point. So Chinese presence in these choke points is also increasing. That is one thing. And island states, so particularly Maldives, etc. So these islands have also increased their or deepened their relations with China. So that again is showing the increasing Chinese influence and presence in the Indian Ocean region. Because of all this, what move that India has taken by being open to Australia's participation in Malabar exercise, it shows that there is a feeling in India that it needs to strengthen further its position in the Indian Ocean region to be able to counter China effectively. So this move has to be seen in this context, that China's power in the region has been on an increase. So this again is part of your GS2 syllabus on international relations. Next we come to the police reforms. So police reforms also, we have seen what issues the police are facing, what reforms need to be incorporated into the police. So this again we have seen as part of discussing the editorials multiple times, and we have also taken up a detailed question for discussion on police reforms. So this particular article is again another reinforcement on the issues which are facing the police in India. So the first is the police attitude towards the vulnerable sections. So even if you look at the number of people who have been on the death row, 76% of the people on the death row, they are poor, Dalits or the minorities. So this shows how the criminal justice system is also against the rather it is more harsh for the poor and the minorities. So 76% of the death row people who are on death row are also the poor, Dalits and the minorities. Next issue is regarding the data, which is very inconsistent. So now we were just discussing from many days regarding the custodial deaths. So here the NCRB data says that between 2010 to 2018, there were nearly 853 custodial deaths. And out of the 853 custodial deaths, 70 deaths happened in 2018 itself. But the National Human Rights Commission puts the death figure at a much higher of nearly 1,600. So therefore, first of all, the data itself of NCRB and NHRC doesn't match. And the second related problem is that even when these many deaths are happening, only 3 policemen have been convicted till date. So the rate of conviction of those policemen who are meting out torture on the accused, that rate of conviction has been very poor. So this is enough. Next is the encounter stories. So recent also we have seen the case of Vikas Dubey, which has again given rise to the issue of staged encounters or the fake encounter stories, where we have heard this several times that in an encounter the accused people, which can be the smugglers or rapists or insurgents, they are being taken by the police, and they will just try to escape from the custody. They snatch the pistol from the police and they fire shot, and in defense the police fire back and the accused are killed. So these stories have become very familiar now to be believed. So next is therefore the issue of staged encounters, which needs to be thoroughly investigated, and this tendency needs to be curbed. Another issue is the FIR registration. So when we go to the police station, often there is a resistance on part of the police to register the FIR. First is that it will bring on more pressure on them to investigate the case and bring it to a conclusion. So their work is going to increase. Second, also because when the registration of FIR itself is less, it is very easy to show that the crime rate in a particular police station, in its jurisdiction, the crime rate has fallen, so which maybe is an indication of good policing in the region. So for this, the police they do not many times register the FIR. This is more so particularly when the women go and report some cases related to harassment or rape. So that time the police are not very willing to record the FIR. So the law itself was changed in 2013, where it said that if a policeman refuses to register a complaint of sexual assault, will face a jail term of 2 years. So he will be sentenced for 2-year imprisonment. But even after that, hardly any policeman is punished. So therefore, even when a remedial action is given in the form of this amendment, it is largely ineffective, because no policeman has hardly been punished for a non-registration of FIR. So this is another thing. And then is the crime rate. So 2018 data shows that the crime rate in India was nearly 383 per 1 lakh population. Whereas if you look at the same for a crime rate in the United States, it is 2,500 per 1 lakh population. So by looking at the crime rate, what does it trying to show? That it actually seems that India has become a more safer and better place for citizens, where the crime rates have fallen. So it is a better policed country, it is a more safer country compared to United States. But it can also be because several crimes are not even registered. So this low crime rate per 1 lakh population is a wrong indication, and that may show that the crimes are not even reported to the police, and when reported, they may not be registering it. So this low crime rate is a wrong indicator which should be used to measure the effectiveness of policing in the country. Next is the police public participation. In India, the police to population ratio, that is the number of police to 1 lakh citizens population, is just 158. So in this statistic, we are even lagging behind our own neighbors. So whenever we have this manpower deficiency, this will lead to inefficiencies also. It will increase the burden on the existing policemen. Then they will have a lot of work, which will reduce their effectiveness in the work they are doing. So maybe they will start investigating the cases very poorly. Poor investigation will again lead to more acquittal, and therefore not justice not being given to the victims. So it will lead to faulty investigation by the police, and sometimes because of these faulty investigations, some poor people are put behind the bars. So the hapless poor are put behind the bars, and they are now this has now led to overcrowding of the jails. So all the related issues come out because of the low police to public population. Issue is this arrest and investigation. So this is particularly with respect to the speed of the arrest and the strength of the investigation. So this depends upon the case and is not very uniform. So if you are looking at the custodial death that happened in Tamil Nadu, so the father and the son were arrested because they had kept their shop open after the time had ended in the evening. So then it took 6 days for the Madras High Court to intervene, and after that only the policemen were arrested. So if you look at the Vikas Dubey case again, he had more than 60 cases, criminal cases pending against him. But even for decades, Vikas Dubey was not even touched. So this shows that the speed of arrest and also the strength of investigation will depend from situation to situation. That is who the person is. So depending if the person is more vulnerable and weak, as we saw in the death row convicts, the death row people, 76% are the poor, Dalits and the minorities. So if the person is poor, is vulnerable, then it will lead to faster investigation and faster arrest, and vice versa. If the person is more influential and powerful, then the arrest will also be delayed. Next is the disciplinary mechanisms. So in the disciplinary mechanism, there are internal mechanisms and external mechanisms. In the internal mechanism, usually it is a disciplinary mechanism where the police are themselves to conduct some disciplinary hearing against their own the policemen. So in this, there is an effort made to keep the dirt under the carpet, so it doesn't actually come out, and more often than not, the policemen are not punished. In the external mechanisms, we have various bodies like the National Human Rights Commission, the State Human Rights Commission. Then apart from that, we have other special bodies like the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Commission, Women's Commission, Minority Commission. So some also have their own police complaints authorities where the citizens go and complain against the police excesses. So all of these are there. Even the Supreme Court guidelines have been there, but these bodies have also not been very effective in providing that disciplinary mechanism for the police. So the editorial also talks about how poor the NHRC has been. It has also been called by the Supreme Court as a toothless tiger. As far as SHRCs are concerned, in Andhra Pradesh, SHRC has no chairman at all. And then in other states like Himachal Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Maharashtra and Rajasthan, the SHRC has no members at all. So it shows how these institutions, which are supposed to hold the police accountable for their excesses on citizens, how these institutions are themselves lacking teeth and how they are only very weak. So these are the various issues regarding police. Next is we will be discussing yesterday's question, which is on the importance of the solar energy and also India various issues and challenges in developing the solar energy potential. So we will quickly discuss first is the importance of solar energy. So when you talk of the importance, try to give multiple dimensions. I think this is a 15 marker question for 250 words. So try to give dimensions as much as possible. So importance, you can say that first it will help us to keep the global warming under control. Under Paris Agreement, we have said that we have to limit the global temperature rise by just 1.5 degrees Celsius. For this, we need to develop solar energy because that will limit the emission of fossil fuels. Second is it is more safe. For instance, if you consider nuclear energy, then we will have the issue of where to dispose of the nuclear waste very safely. But this is very solar energy is more safer. Then it can also support decentralization, where we can have rooftop solar panels and that can provide electricity in the homes. So you can quote the Bangladesh successful case study where these solar rooftops have been kept on the houses of the villages, and these houses are provided with electric supply because of these solar rooftop panels. So that is helping in the education of children and also economic activities in the villages. So this Bangladesh case study you can quote. Next is it helps in rural electrification, and with rural electrification several rural industries can be started. So this will curb the distress migration that happens from villages to cities. Fifth, you can talk about the fact that it is more reliable and is also inexhaustible. It is not like the fossil fuels which can get exhausted after continuous use. Then it is also cheap as well as affordable form of generating energy. The price of the solar panels have rather decreased by nearly 60% now, and so therefore you can talk about its affordability. Next is the employment generation. The installation will require manpower. Solar designers are needed, those who will maintain and provide services when they go wrong. So, just 1 gigawatt of solar manufacturing facility will generate nearly 4,000 direct and indirect jobs. So, it will help in employment generation. Eighth, of course, in energy security. So, India is going to be, the demand for energy is going to increase. So, in energy security, it is going to help. Then India also has a natural advantage because India, being a tropical country, receives abundant sunshine which needs to be captured. So like this, I have already quoted 9 importance of solar energy which you can cite. So next is the various issues or the challenges which this sector is facing. So among the challenges you can say that first is this manufacturing of solar panels. So we just discussed today that how we are dependent on the panels that we import from China, and we lack the domestic manufacturing capacity much. So that is one thing. And second thing, that also we saw today, that low cost financing needs to be provided to the manufacturers. So this is not there presently, which is an issue or a challenge. And most of these banks are also suffering from the NPA, the non-performing assets issues, and they do not want to provide loans to them. Then as availability of land or land acquisition is another important thing, because the deployment of solar panels require large areas of land. So land acquisition is a problem. Then skilled workforce. So lack of skilled workforce in this sector, the solar energy sector, is again another issue. Then also the evacuation power. So once the power is generated, if there is excess power generated, it needs to be evacuated from the generation place. So this evacuation infrastructure is again not there, and that is again posing a challenge to the solar energy sector. So also we said that we are dependent on imports from China. So we are trying to develop our own manufacturing base in the solar panels. But for this, government had started imposing what is called as domestic content requirement. But this went to the WTO and the dispute settlement panel. So we have issues with the WTO while imposing the domestic content requirement. And therefore when these countries like China are dumping their produce of solar panels into India, this is hurting our domestic manufacturers, and this dumping by China and other countries is leading to the erosion of profits of domestic manufacturers, and which is a big disincentive for them to further develop or operate in this sector. Next is also the cost. The cost of the solar energy tariffs is one of the lowest in the world in India. So this is very much unsustainable for the developers, and as a result of which they have now started to compromise on the quality, which is not good. So next is also the discoms issue. So these discoms, they purchase the renewable power which they have to do mandatorily as some percentage. So but the discoms already are in a poor financial health, so they are unable to pay their dues to the renewable energy companies. So this is even putting the renewable energy companies in bad financial health. So the third is the solar based intellectual property. While the more focus has been on deployment of the solar panels, whatever has been import, but less focus is being given on the development of intellectual property in the solar energy sector. So this again needs to be worked upon. Then India being a tropical country, it has the problems of dust. So dust generation is more, and when these dust settles on the solar panels, it reduces the efficiency of the solar panels, and they will frequently have to be cleaned, which will increase the operational cost. So I have already listed 11 issues or challenges in the solar energy sector. In the conclusion, you can just conclude it by with some of the government initiatives, like the solar mission is there, solar park scheme is there, the viability gap funding which is given to the manufacturers, then the canal top scheme. All of these are there, and going forward we need to provide low cost financing, and ease out, liberalize the land acquisition norms, and improve our domestic manufacturing. And as yesterday we discussed, we need to work upon the technologies like panel manufacturing, batteries and storage. So this is our way forward. So today I am not giving any question because all the topics were repetitive. So let me see if I can discuss any other important topic, or come out with some answer writing tips for you. So, and also some of you are little bit worried about the time at which the ICANN is getting uploaded. So sometimes it's in the morning and sometimes it's in the evening or night. So because I am not exactly settled down in a place, and so therefore there's no stability for me, so kind of you'll have to adjust for a month or so, which can vary. The time of uploading can vary any time of the day. So please adjust for another month. After that it will be more regular. That's it for today. Thank you.